Have you ever stopped to wonder what happened to the very first murderer in human history? We all know the story of Cain and Abel. One brother killed the other out of jealousy. But what happened next? The Bible tells us that God punished Cain, but didn't kill him. Instead, he condemned him to wander the earth, and then simply let him go. Where did he go? What did he do? And how did his life truly end? Today, we'll delve into Cain's legacy to uncover one of history's oldest and most unsettling mysteries. We'll explore not only biblical accounts but also some truly wild theories you've probably never even considered. Brace yourselves, this is going to be fascinating. First, let's quickly recap how it all began. Adam and Eve had two sons, Cain, who worked the land, and Abel, who tended sheep. Both brought offerings to God. However, Abel's offering was accepted, but Cain's was rejected. Overcome with envy and rage, Cain couldn't bear it. He lured his brother into a field and murdered him. This was the first murder, the first recorded act of human cruelty. And when God asked Cain where his brother was, he replied with a defiant phrase that has become iconic, "Am I my brother's keeper?" Naturally, deceiving God didn't work. Punishment followed immediately, but it was a truly peculiar punishment. So Cain receives his punishment, and this is where things get truly intriguing. God doesn't just banish him. He places a unique curse upon him, but surprisingly, also a form of protection. Let's delve into the specifics of this punishment. God says to Cain, "You are now cursed. The ground which has drunk your brother's blood will no longer yield its strength to you." What does this mean in plain language? Cain was a farmer by trade. Now, his primary livelihood, everything he knew how to do, became meaningless. Wherever he went, the ground beneath his feet would be barren. He was doomed to starvation and eternal wandering. He became the first exile, the first homeless wanderer in history. And Cain falls into despair. He tells God that the punishment is too severe. He fears not the exile itself, but that anyone who finds him will simply kill him. And this makes perfect sense. In a world without laws or police, he's the first murderer, making him an easy target. And this is where God does something completely unexpected. He grants Cain protection. He states that anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance sevenfold. And to ensure everyone knew, God put a mark on Cain. And now we come to the famous Mark of Cain. When you hear this, what do you picture? Probably a scar on the forehead, a branding iron mark, or even a magical tattoo, just like in TV shows. Popular culture has firmly ingrained this image in our minds. But, more than likely, it was nothing of the sort. The thing is, the original Hebrew text uses the word ot, which translates to sign or token. This doesn't necessarily imply something physical on the body. It could have been a specific gesture, a word, or even an invisible divine aura that deterred attackers. Some theologians believe it was simply God's promise to Cain, which somehow affected anyone who wished to harm him. So, the Mark of Cain isn't a brand of shame. On the contrary, it's a sign of divine protection. Quite a paradox, isn't it? Cain is cursed to be an eternal wanderer, yet he's under a divine witness protection program. He cannot be killed, and with this strange, dual destiny, he sets out on his journey east of Eden. And so, our outcast, cursed yet protected by God, journeys east of Eden. The Bible tells us he settled in the land of Nod. Incidentally, the word Nod itself translates from ancient Hebrew as wandering or exile. In other words, it's less a geographical location and more a description of his state. He settled in the land of wandering. Then the Bible presents us with a line that has baffled many readers for millennia. I quote, "And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch." Wait, what wife? Where did she come from? According to the simplest chronology, at this point, only Adam, Eve, and Cain himself should have been on the planet. Whom did he meet in this desolate land? Could there have been other people already living there? This question has given rise to two main theories, both interesting in their own way. The first and most officially accepted theological version states that Cain married one of his sisters. Yes, by our modern standards, that sounds, to put it mildly, very strange and wrong. But we need to understand the context. At the very beginning of human history, when there were very few people, interfamily marriages were the only way to continue the human race. Prohibitions against them would appear in the Mosaic laws much, much later. The Bible explicitly states that Adam and Eve had sons and daughters. So, most likely, Cain's wife was a daughter of Adam and Eve, his sister, or possibly his niece. Simple and a little unsettling. But there's another, far bolder theory, the pre-Adamite hypothesis. According to it, Adam and Eve were not in fact the very first humans on the planet. They were the progenitors of only one specific line of humanity, the one from which the Jewish people would later descend. And in the land of Nod and other places, other tribes, other people, created by God earlier, were already living. And Cain simply found a wife from one of these tribes. This theory is not recognized by most churches, but it elegantly solves the mystery of Cain's wife and the population of his future city. Yet defying his image as an eternal lonely wanderer, Cain does something utterly astonishing and, on the surface, completely illogical. He has a son, whom he names Enoch. And what does this perpetual vagabond, cursed to roam a barren land, decide to do? He builds a city, the very first city in human history, and he names it after his son, Enoch. Hold on a second. Let that truly sink in. A man to whom God explicitly declared, "You shall be a fugitive and a vagabond on the earth," proceeds to establish a city. A city is a symbol of stability, permanence and community. It's the complete antithesis of wandering. How can this possibly be reconciled? This action lends itself to several interpretations. The first and most dramatic posits it as an act of defiance, an outright act of disobedience towards God. It's as if Cain is saying, "Ah, you've condemned me to eternal wandering. Well, I'll build walls, I'll create my own world, my own fortress, and I won't need to go anywhere." This is humanity's attempt to overcome a divine curse through sheer willpower. Unable to find peace on the land God provided, he fabricates his own, an artificial world enclosed by walls. The second interpretation is more profound, more psychological. Perhaps Cain's curse wasn't primarily physical, but spiritual. He could build a city, surround himself with people, even found a dynasty, but inwardly, in his soul, he remained an exile forever. He was a solitary figure, even amidst multitudes. The city became not a home, but a gilded cage, a constant reminder of what he had truly lost, inner peace and his connection with God. Regardless, this action elevates Cain beyond a mere murderer, positioning him as the progenitor of civilization itself. It is his descendants, according to the Bible, who would go on to invent crafts, music, and metalworking. Thus, the entire urban, technological civilization we know today traces its origins back to the cursed fratricide. And this brings us to some of the darkest and most astonishing legends surrounding him. And finally, we're diving into the world of Apocrypha, legends, and frankly, wild theories. The Bible's account falls silent here, but human imagination, that never does. And the more unanswered questions there are, the more vivid these fantasies become. So, the most popular and perhaps most shocking theory, one you've almost certainly encountered if you've watched any supernatural series, is that Cain was the first vampire. Let me clarify right away. The Bible contains no mention of this. This idea originated in the 1990s within the world of the tabletop role-playing game, Vampire: The Masquerade. But why has it resonated so strongly? Just think. Cain spilled his brother's blood and was cursed by God. He was condemned to wander the earth forever, specifically the land of Nod, which can be interpreted as the land of night. He bears a mark that prevents anyone from killing him, rendering him virtually immortal. He is an exile cut off from light and divine grace. Combine all these elements and the image of the first, most powerful vampire, the progenitor of all bloodsuckers, effortlessly takes shape. It's a beautiful, dark, gothic tale, but ultimately just a tale. Here's another equally well-known legend that attempts to answer the question of how Cain eventually met his end. It tells of his seventh-generation descendant, Lamech. This Lamech was a hunter who had become blind in his old age. One day he went hunting, guided by a young boy. Suddenly, the boy saw something stir in the bushes and yelled at Lamech to shoot. Lamech drew his bow and fired blindly. The arrow hit its mark. When they approached, they were horrified to discover that Lamech had killed his own ancestor, Cain, who was by then a decrepit old man. Upon realizing what he had done, Lamech, in a fit of rage and despair, struck his young guide, killing him as well. There's a chilling irony in this legend. Cain, divinely protected from the vengeance of outsiders, ultimately met his end at the accidental hand of his own descendant. All these stories, from the vampire lore to the accidental hunting death, are attempts to fill the void left by the biblical narrative. They illustrate just how profoundly the image of the first murderer captivated and disturbed human minds. However, the true biblical conclusion to his story proved to be far more profound and definitive. So what really became of him? The Bible doesn't tell us how or exactly when Cain himself died. There's not a single line that says, "And Cain died at the age of so many years." His personal story simply drops off the map, and that could have been the end of it, if not for one global event. But the Bible does tell us about the fate of his entire lineage, and that perhaps is the real, chilling answer to our question. A few generations later, the great flood swept over the earth, the very same one with Noah's Ark. A flood that, according to Scripture, annihilated all of humanity except for righteous Noah's family. And now here's the kicker. Noah was a descendant of Seth, Adam and Eve's third son, born after Abel's murder. This means Cain's entire lineage, all his descendants, the builders, the musicians, the blacksmiths, his entire people and their city, were simply wiped off the face of the earth. Their legacy was completely annihilated. So the curse of the eternal wanderer played out on the most global and final scale imaginable. No one remained to continue his legacy or even just remember him. His line simply became a dead end. So there you have it, a story from the first murder to the complete obliteration of an entire lineage. Cain didn't just vanish. His entire world vanished with him, washed away by the waters of the flood. Thanks for sticking around to the end of this video. If you found this ancient mystery intriguing, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next investigations. Now, a question for you. What do you think was Cain's true fate? And what exactly did his mark truly represent? Share your theories in the comments below. I'd love to read them.